Hey folks, welcome to the Ramble. So later this week on the channel, if you're watching these as I upload them, obviously, I'll be going back into the Atheist Reads series. I'll be doing my second to last Atheist Reads series, and it will be focused on the book The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And I guess maybe because I'm coming to the end, because I've decided to not do the Atheist Read series anymore after this year, I'm getting maybe reflective a little bit, a little nostalgic, looking back at not necessarily the books that I've reviewed, because only a few of those really stand out, and the ones that stand out don't really stand out for any good reasons. But I have to say I have learned some important things as I've read so many books of apologetics. By the time I finish this year, I will have done 25 series of an Atheist Reads, and I will have read more than 25 books because a few of the series have dealt with more than one book in a single series. So I'll have read close to 30 Christian apologist books when all is said and done. And the things that I have learned have not necessarily been things that the authors of the various books have meant to teach their readers, but nonetheless, I consider them valuable lessons, and I'm grateful that I have learned them however I happen to come by them. And one of the most important things I learned was that there is such a thing as honest disagreement. And that might seem like an obvious thing to some of you. You might not see why that's such a revelation. But think about how many times we disagree with somebody, or somebody disagrees with us, or we just see two people disagreeing with each other, and they don't allow for the possibility that they have both just honestly come to different conclusions. And I saw that a lot in my fellow atheists when I would consider material from apologists, especially from certain people like Ray Comfort, who have a reputation, and a deserved reputation, I have to say, for being hucksters, or for being, maybe unscrupulous, or coming across as dishonest, or coming across as people who are pandering for attention and aren't necessarily doing anything that deserves to be taken seriously. And a lot of atheists would say, oh, he can't possibly believe that. Or they engage with a creationist, and they would say, well, they can't possibly believe that. That's so obviously wrong that there's no way they could possibly believe it. Or if they do sincerely believe it, then there must be something wrong with them. They must be irrational. Rational, reasonable, intelligent people can look at the same set of facts and come to completely different conclusions. That is something that I have learned, that I have come to accept as I have studied Christian apologetics. And it's something that I have been happy to have, because it's applicable across a wide range of different conversations. It doesn't mean that every disagreement is like that. Of course, there are instances where there is a dishonest disagreement. Sometimes when you say, oh God, they can't possibly believe that, you're actually onto something. They don't really believe it, but I've learned to give people the benefit of the doubt. And most of the time, when someone states a disagreement with someone else, it's because they honestly disagree. And it's possible to have an informed, honest disagreement, because that's another thing that people tend to appeal to. They say, well, okay, maybe you do honestly believe such and such, but if you knew this, then you wouldn't think that way. And again, there are many instances where, yes, a disagreement is born out of ignorance. And if the person who disagrees with you did know what you know, they would agree with you. But there are also times where you could all know exactly the same stuff. You could all have the same set of facts that you're working from, and you still reach different conclusions. It happens. It's wacky, but it happens. People of goodwill and good faith who have all the relevant facts can come to different conclusions and can disagree with each other honestly, and perhaps irreconcilably. That's just the way things work sometimes. And I'm reminded of this over the last few days as I have been reading about the latest episode in a now rather numerous collection of episodes of this sort of thing happening with Sam Harris, who is, for whatever reason, still one of the most popular and prolific and high-profile atheist figures in the United States and in the world, really. I say inexplicably because I am so far over my allegiance to Harris that I can't possibly overstate how over and done I am with Sam Harris. I know a lot of you still find something useful in him. You still think he's worth keeping around for whatever reason. You're entitled to think that. I am not there anymore. I think that he has told me everything he needs to tell me, and there is nothing that I agree with him on that I think is important enough or stated eloquently enough by him that it's worth me keeping him around, given all the other awful shit that he has said over the years. I'm done. Just Sam Harris can fuck off, right? I'm completely over him. But over the last week or so, the last 2 weeks, I guess now, Harris and Ezra Klein of Vox have been having a sort of back and forth over Charles Murray and the bell curve and scientific racism and all these other issues that Harris himself brought up last year when he brought Charles Murray onto his podcast and treated him like an honored guest, treated him like an intellectual king in exile. Oh, woe to us for mistreating poor, misunderstood, noble Charles Murray and his scientific racism. The thing that I notice, and the reason why I bring this story into this video, is that both when Harris is addressing people who disagree with Charles Murray just in the abstract, and when he addresses Ezra Klein in particular and the specific disagreements that they have, Harris doesn't seem to allow for the possibility that there is an honest disagreement between them. He ascribes nefarious motives to Ezra Klein. He describes Ezra Klein as a bad faith actor. He describes Ezra Klein as someone who is not treating him, Sam Harris, or Charles Murray fairly. It's as though the possibility that someone could honestly look at the work of Charles Murray and conclude, based on a fully informed reading of his work, that Charles Murray's work is not valid, is not useful, is not particularly worthwhile, and also is kind of racist, or maybe extremely racist. It's as though Sam Harris doesn't allow for that possibility. That can't possibly happen. If someone thinks that, it must be because they have an agenda or they just haven't read or understood Murray properly. And Harris does the same thing when people disagree with him personally. That's his favorite move when someone criticizes him. He says, well, I've been taken out of context. Obviously, they only listened to a few isolated clips of my statement. They didn't listen to the whole 2-hour podcast, or they didn't read the whole 300-page book, or they didn't listen to the entire statement that I gave on stage that night in Arizona, or something. Crucial context is missing. And if that context were present, then clearly all of these people would agree with me because I am right. I can't possibly be wrong. And no honest person fully informed on the relevant facts could possibly think that I was wrong. That's a dangerously arrogant position to be in, where you are convinced that the only reason anyone could think that you're wrong is because they are being dishonest or they are not fully informed. And let's all please take care to never allow ourselves to get into that position. Even if you find that you are in a disagreement with a person and it is irreconcilable, you have examined your own position and you've satisfied yourself that no, you're right. You don't feel like you have to move from where you are. You've examined their position. You honestly think that they are wrong and that person has done the same for you, and there's no moving. There's no settling the disagreement. There's no compromise. It's just you think that and I think this, and there's no way that these two points of view can be reconciled or harmonized at all. Even if you reach that point, that doesn't mean that the other person is being dishonest. That doesn't mean that the other person would agree with you if not for X, Y, and Z. It's entirely possible, and in fact likely, because it happens all the time, that people honestly reach different conclusions. I don't think that Sam Harris doesn't believe that there is validity in the work of Charles Murray. I take him at his word. When he says just what to me are utterly ridiculous, like embarrassingly wrong things, and he says, and these facts are as well established as any facts in political science. He says that as though that's a fact, and that's the opposite of a fact. It's not just, Murray's work is not controversial. It's been almost universally rejected by the scientific establishment. And Harris talks about Murray's conclusions as though everybody just knows that he's right. I'm embarrassed for Sam Harris when he says things like that. And of course, he says it in his trademark monotone, dispassionate voice that a lot of people have mistaken for reasonable and reliable and authoritative. Oh, he never gets upset about anything. He always keeps a nice, even, monotone voice. So he must know what he's talking about. He's considered the issues dispassionately, and he's reached the best conclusion. So let's listen to what he has to say. I'm embarrassed for him when he says things like that. Because I honestly think he probably believes that. I don't assume that he knows he's wrong, but he's saying it to pander to an audience that he knows wants to hear the things that he's saying. I assume he really believes it. When he wrote a piece several years ago saying, yeah, I endorse torture. I mean, that's a horrific thing to say. Why would anyone say that? I don't understand that. But I believe that he honestly said it. I believe that he honestly felt that way. I don't get it. I'll never understand it. I think it's monstrous. I feel the same way about the several times that he insistently, stubbornly endorsed racial profiling of Muslims at airports. I mean, he held on to that like a dog on a bone. He would not let that go. He tried to rephrase it. He tried to present it in a few different ways. Oh, no, I didn't mean profile Muslims. I meant don't profile people who look like they might not be Muslims. Okay, well, but he would not let that go. And I was embarrassed about that too. I thought, God, can you imagine being a person who fancies yourself an intellectual, progressive, open-minded person in the 21st century and saying that? But he said it multiple times. He doubled and tripled down, and I believe him. I think he means it. I don't assume that he is a bad faith actor when he says that. I don't assume that he is missing some piece of the puzzle. Well, okay, he's missing empathy. He's missing empathy. But I believe that he sincerely believes what he says he believes. And that can be tough, especially if it's someone you admire, which again, I used to sort of admire Harris. I don't anymore. I think he's an asshole. And I choose that word carefully, by the way. I'm not saying that he's a person I mostly respect, but I just disagree with him on so much that I can't pay attention to him anymore. I mean, I think he's an asshole. I don't think he means to be. I don't think he's consciously malicious in the things he says and the things he proposes and the things he promotes. I don't think that he sees himself as doing harm to people, but clearly he is, and I think he's an asshole, and he can go fuck himself. But I don't think he's dishonest. I don't think he's a bad faith actor. I think he's honestly, sincerely, in all good faith, a complete fucking asshole. And see, here's the thing. If Sam Harris wanted to say that Ezra Klein is an asshole for saying the things that Ezra Klein has said about Charles Murray, for saying that Charles Murray's work amounts to scientific racism, Sam Harris is entitled to say that. He can say, man, Ezra Klein's an asshole. You know, how could he say that about the wonderful Charles Murray and his unimpeachable body of work? Sam Harris could say that. It's his right to think that Ezra Klein is an asshole for thinking those things. Sam Harris could think that the entire scientific establishment is just full of assholes because they have all rejected the work of Charles Murray, because they have all decided that it's horseshit, that it's without substance and without merit, right? Sam Harris would be within his rights. It would be reasonable from his point of view. It would be reasonable for him to say, they're just a bunch of assholes. They're just assholes. He could say that. But he doesn't say that. He goes beyond that. And he says, they're acting in bad faith. He says the only reason that they disagree with Murray, the only reason they attack his work, the only reason they discredit his work is because they have something against him, or because they're being pushed to do it by this political correct culture that we have. He doesn't allow for the fact that people could just honestly disagree with him, that people could just honestly think that Murray's work is without merit and dangerous. He doesn't allow for the fact that people could honestly believe that Sam Harris is wrong, is an asshole, because they honestly feel that way, not because they think that he really knows better, but he's just trying to sell somebody something, or he's trying to push an agenda, or he's trying to put forward some kind of dishonest narrative, and that's why he says the things he says, and he doesn't really believe it. We all know Occam's razor, and a lot of us, even though we don't know that this is the name for it, we also know Hanlon's razor, which cautions us not to attribute to malice that which could just as easily be attributed to ignorance or incompetence. And I think we need to have some kind of corollary to Hanlon's razor, which also cautions us not to attribute to ignorance or dishonesty or bad faith that which could just as easily be explained as an honest disagreement. That's the most upsetting thing, the most troubling thing, the most unsettling thing about the way Sam Harris responds to criticism of him personally or his work and of the work of people that he has promoted and amplified like Murray, is that he doesn't seem to allow for the possibility that there is honest disagreement, that people aren't just out to get him, that people aren't treating him unfairly, that people have reached the legitimate, honest conclusion that he is wrong and that what he's doing is harmful in some way. There has to be an agenda behind it. There has to be some reason people are doing that other than rationality, other than a good faith disagreement. And unfortunately, a lot of Sam Harris's acolytes, for want of a better term, in the atheist secular community have adopted the same approach. When I see Seth Andrews responding to people calling him out for his various shortcomings last year in response to MythCon and this year in response to the Lawrence Krauss accusations, exact same act. Bad faith actors. Oh, I'm being taken out of context. That's not what I said. That's what you said. People aren't being fair. People are being uncharitable. Matt Dillahunty had the same act. Matt Dillahunty always has the same act whenever anybody calls him out. The fact that people could honestly have a problem with something he said never seems to occur to him. It's always, oh, you're being unfair. You're treating me unfair. You can't really think that, because I don't allow for the possibility that I might actually be wrong in someone's eyes. You can't really disagree with me, can you? There has to be something else going on. Because Sam Harris is such a prominent figure, and because that is his reflexive go-to response for virtually any time anyone expresses disagreement with him or criticizes him or challenges him or suggests that maybe he shouldn't have said something he said or shouldn't have promoted a particular policy or a particular theory that he promoted, because that is his go-to strategy. It's become the go-to strategy of all the people just beneath him, just a little bit below his level in the atheist community, who fancy themselves of the same ilk as him. And that's an incredibly dangerous thing. It's an incredibly dangerous place to be, where you have convinced yourself that the only reason people disagree with you is because they're being dishonest, or they're being unfair to you, or they're being unduly influenced by some nefarious force like political correctness, God help us. It's not the sort of thing that a person who fancies himself an intellectual, a reasonable person, a purveyor of enlightenment, it's not the sort of position that kind of a person should be comfortable having. But I think that's why so many people have that position. That's why so many people default to responding to things in that way. Because it's comfortable. Because you get to tell yourself, well, I'm right. And they really know that I'm right. If they could remove the scales from their eyes, if they could see past their own agenda, or if they only knew what I knew, then they would agree with me. They know deep down, they know that I'm right. There's just this other thing that is forcing them to say that I'm wrong or clouding their vision. But if their vision were clear, and if they were truly as unbiased and rational as I, then they would see that I'm right. And that's something else that I have learned from the Atheist Read series. And it's something that I'm grateful to have learned. I'm grateful to have realized this, but I wish that it were not true. And that is that there are a lot of prominent atheists who sound exactly like apologists.